Okay, so we're going to talk about alcohol production, more specifically ethanol, which is the alcohol which is found in alcoholic drinks. And it's also used extremely extensively as a solvent in the chemical industry, so it's a very important molecule. Just a couple of background bits. Well, it can form hydrogen bonds because it's got lone pairs on the oxygen. It's got a delta positive hydrogen, so that means ethanol mixes well with water. It's water soluble, and that is why it's an intoxicant as well, because like this is enables it to be water soluble. It's hydrophilic, and if you think this bit here though, that's mostly van der Waals forces. That's going to form. That's hydrophobic. Like the fact that it is hydrophilic means that it can be ingested and get into the blood quite quickly. The fact that it's hydrophobic means it can go in the lipid bilayer, the membranes, and mess up the membranes of the nervous system. That's responsible for the effects of the intoxicating effects of ethanol. And all anesthetics work in that way, by being soluble in the lipid bilayer and messing things up in the nerve cells. Okay, so we need to think about two ways of producing ethanol, and one of them we've come across already is dehydration of ethene. So if you look in an earlier video, that's in the alkenes topic, which is 3.4. Okay, so you look at one of those videos there. You need to know the mechanism of that. If you get ethene, and the old-fashioned way was to react it with sulfuric acid, conc sulfuric acid. You form an intermediate, and then you react that intermediate with water, and you form ethanol, and you get the sulfuric acid back. So that really has acted as a catalyst. So have a look at a earlier video for the mechanism there, which you do need to know. Nowadays, this is done not done by adding ethene to conc sulfuric, then adding water. The ethene is reacted with steam. So plus H2O gas. It's an equilibrium reaction, and you end up with ethanol. You end up with ethanol, and you need a catalyst for that. You need a phosphoric acid catalyst. So phosphoric acid is H3PO4. Okay, so I think a vast amount of ethanol is made in this way, and the ethene is obviously going to come from cracking of crude oil, and so the ethanol that is made is not sustainable, because crude oil is not a renewable resource, is it? Okay, but that's one way of making ethanol. The other way of making ethanol is, and you've probably done it in biology, is by fermentation. In fermentation, you need yeast, okay, and which is a living organism. And there are many different enzymes involved in the conversion of glucose. You start off with glucose, C6, H12, O6. So you start off with glucose solution, and you leave it with yeast. You obviously want the temperature to be less than 37 degrees C, because otherwise you kill all the yeast. And you don't you want anaerobic conditions. If you don't have anaerobic, if there's too much oxygen about, the yeast will oxidize the glucose with oxygen, form CO2 and water. You don't want that. What you want it to do is form CO2 and ethanol, C2H5OH. And if you want to balance that, all you've got to do is put a 2 there, a 2 there, and you'll find that that balances quite nicely. Right, so that's another way of making of ethanol. Now, this ethanol it could be used as a fuel. It's called a biofuel. And I think in Brazil, where they grow a lot of sugarcane, they actually make a lot of ethanol in this way, and they use it to power cars. It's called a biofuel because it's coming from a biological source. It's not coming from a fossil fuel. Some might say that it is carbon neutral. That's a little bit of a dubious claim. What do we mean by that? Is that the CO2, when you burn this fuel, yes, you release CO2, but when you made the glucose, the plant took in CO2. But it's a bit of a dubious claim because you've got to, well, the ethanol you make in this way is only about 15% pure. It's in aqueous solution. You have to pure it by fractional distillation, which requires energy. Also, harvesting the sugarcane, growing the sugarcane, all that requires energy, so it's not considered to be really carbon neutral. And it's also, it may be considered to be renewable because you can keep growing more sugarcane, but then is it ethical to be growing, things for a fuel when maybe you should be growing it for food instead? Anyway, so they're the two different ways of making ethanol. That's all you really need to know. Not much chemistry in it really. So it's the hydration of ethene, this one up here, which is a bit more tricky, and you do need to know the mechanism from the old video in section 3.3, and then fermentation with yeast. A bit bigger. Fermentation with yeast to make ethanol, which could be considered to be a biofuel. Okay, so next video is a bit more proper chemistry really.